Are politicians just in denial, and the police actually, just in denial about the extent of firearms violence in this country?
Yes, I think they are. I mean, this is a desperate, awful and tragic, I mean, we overuse the word tragic, but this genuinely is a tragic story. And, you know, the first thought is always with Olivia Pratt-Korbel and her family. It's an appalling thing to have happened. And yet when I listened to the Liverpool Crime Commissioner and indeed a haggish woman who seems to be a Labour councillor for the area, they seem to be in total denial. This was an interview on Newsnight which I saw where the woman councillor actually corrected Kirsty Walker and said, actually, there aren't lots of guns in the city. We don't know that there were any guns. This is a one-off incident. Well, it clearly isn't a one-off incident. You know, there have been 4 shootings, as you quite rightly say, including Olivia's in the last week or so. I mean, this is something which is happening, and these politicians seem to be in some sort of state of denial about it. And it reminds me a bit of the time when Sadiq Khan took over as Mayor of London, and he had decided, and he had been very critical of things like stop and search and so on. And when he took over, and the crime rate was going up massively, he reinstituted stop and search very, very quickly. Because it worked. And I think that this is a problem which the left has. I mean, I think, in a sense, when we look at the Liverpool situation, the left most definitely has a point that successive governments, but particularly the Conservative government, has cut the number of police officers on the beat. I think that's kind of incontestable, and the Conservative Party ought to be ashamed of that, because it has contributed to a greater lawlessness on our streets and also people living in fear. But at the same time, the left consistently denies that things are as bad as they are. It doesn't really like the police. Don't forget, it's the left in America which wishes to defund the police. They think that people can look after themselves perfectly well, and we don't need these uniformed fascists wandering around. And at the same time, the police themselves, as you alluded to in your introduction, Dan, are too busy chasing microaggressions, imaginary hate crimes, going down on one knee and painting their patrol cars in rainbow colours. They seem to have become disassociated with what we want them to do, whether that be burglary, and the clear-up rates are the lowest they've ever been in history, or car crime, or in this particular case, the case of organised crime and armed thugs roaming the streets. And it's undoubtedly a lot more difficult for the police to get to the bottom of issues such as the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel than it is to call someone out for having retweeted a transphobic remark on Twitter. It takes a bit more guts, investigation and manpower. So I think, in a sense, both of our parties have a lot to blame for this. There is the delusion of the left, and there is the underfunding of the right. And until we get both of those sorted out, this stuff is going to get worse and worse.
Indeed, and I think you're really right to point out that the police, because of this movement to defund them and the way the left have started to talk about the police, they seem to want to lean into that. And that's why there's so much of this wokery going on. And I just think the police have lost respect. We've lost respect of the police, and the streets are lawless as a result.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the police can only police a society with the consensus of that society. Mm-hmm. And you get the feeling that in some cities that this is breaking down in particular communities. Much as it broke down in London in the 80s, in particularly Black British Caribbean communities. Sometimes, you know, I don't doubt at all that the police were racist. I think that's kind of incontestable. But there needs to be some sort of consensus between the community and the police, and that is not helped when the local officials and the local representatives seem to think that everything's tickety-boo, and that, sad though the death of Olivia Pratt-Korbel was, this is just a one-off incident. it doesn't help anybody. And as you say, the leaning into, as you put it, of this theory that the police are a kind of hostile occupying force doesn't do anything amongst that community to give people a degree of faith and security in their local police force.